Keep eating though, please, because there's tons of food. First of all, my family and I would like to thank all of you for coming today. And for the love and support you've shown us these last 2 or 3 months, which have been kind of roller coastery, to say the least. It's really meant so much to all of us to have that support from all of you. I normally, when I do this kind of thing, I don't like to really read from notes, but there's a danger with me rambling if I don't. In our family, that happens. As was demonstrated by my brother-in-law's sermon, which got a little rambling at times. But when we thought about how we'd provide some opportunity to remember and celebrate Dad's life, it seemed like it would make sense to ask some people who knew Dad from different perspectives to share some of their favorite memories. See, Dad was a son, he was a brother, a husband, a father, an uncle, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a pastor, a counselor, a mentor, and a good friend to so many. For that reason, we thought it would be impossible for one person to wrap all of that up. And since my name is Heilman and he's my dad, I decided I would be going first. And also that I had permission to talk longer than anyone who followed me. So when I sat down and started thinking about some of the memories of Dad, I had flashes of somewhat random events and experiences that I shared with him that may not seem noteworthy to most, but they were clearly important to me. For example, working with Dad in the yard and helping him plant the garden. He would spend hours planting and harvesting each summer, and he loved every minute of it. His garden was huge. I think there was a picture of it that flashed upstairs. Absolutely huge. But not because we needed it to feed our family, because Dad's greatest joy was to share what he grew with everyone else. So I'm sure some of you are recipients of his tomatoes and beans and cucumbers and whatever else he happened to grow, Mr. Newth. Mr. Newth, you seem to be a theme today. And when Amanda came along, my dad started bringing her down to the garden to pick vegetables with him, and she still remembers those times, even though I think she was maybe 4 or 5. Along with planting came groundhogs, whose mission it was to eat his precious vegetables. Dad bought a have-a-heart trap, and I think I went with him to deliver at least 20 of those guys out to the country. And he made me go to the same place every time because he felt strongly that they would find each other again and reunite as a family. I know my sister and brother would agree that a not so fond memory of Dad was hearing his car pull up to the house and quickly shutting off the TV so we could start working on some chore before he came in. You see, Dad did not abide laziness. So we got pretty good at having a standby chore ready for those times to avoid Dad hearing Dad express his disappointment at our lack of initiative. We would hear my dad and his siblings tell the same family stories over and over again at family reunions. And I have aunts and cousins here that will attest to that. And those stories just never got old. We laughed just as hard as the last time we had heard them. I think Dad probably laughed the loudest when my Uncle Rich imitated something my grandpa, Heilman, or Potter, as they would call him, would have said. My dad loved getting together with his brothers and his sisters and the whole Heilman clan. Those reunions hold some of my fondest memories, and I know the rest of my family would agree with that. The Heilmans also had their own language of sorts. They would use German-sounding, made-up words that just became part of our vocabulary. And my cousin Liz, who is here today, one year even took the time to create a Heilman dictionary. And I don't know how many words were in that dictionary, but at least 30 or 40, I think. Summer vacations in Concordia were really fun for all of us. This was a very small community where it was safe to just run around on bikes and explore the town. We loved those summers and often spent time with our cousins there. But for Dad, he would work so hard during that week, making sure that my grandpa's house was clean and his yard was perfect by the time he left. So to me, it didn't seem like much of a vacation for him. But I think he so enjoyed helping people, whether it was family or friends, that he loved that week just as much as we all did. Dad was happiest when he was helping his family and his friends, not by making grand gestures, but by doing the things he did to help others every day as just part of his routine. I could go on for a long time recounting more memories of those little moments in time with Dad, but I think the most important thing to convey to you was that my father dearly loved his family. As he grew older, he got better at expressing that much more openly to all of us. And in his last days, there was no doubt that my dad had more love for us than we could have possibly imagined. To move on to some memories of Dad as a pastor, welcome, Joel. I'll start with a story that incredibly I heard for the very first time about a week or two ago. You all know Clarence Schatz, or most of you. And when Clarence and his family moved to this area, they had narrowed it down to a couple of churches. And one was in Wilmington and one was here. It's not like there's Lutheran churches at every corner around this place. So one day he decided to come here, and he found Dad outside, and this was probably in I'm thinking the 60s at some point. Dad was cutting the grass. Big surprise. Since he cut the grass till he was 90 here. But he went up to Dad and they had a good conversation. And at the end of that conversation, my dad pointed over to the lawnmower and said, "Hey, why don't you help me finish up here?" Well, how could you resist joining a church that made you feel so welcome and so needed? So you know Clarence Schatz did land here many, many years ago. And I know many of you have just great stories of meeting Dad for the first time and Mom, and when you were trying to pick a church, and what a difference that meant to you in that process. Who remembers confirmation with Dad? Raise your hand. Okay. I try to explain to my daughter what it was like, but words don't do it justice. So back then we didn't write testimonials like the kids do today. Instead we were questioned in front of the entire congregation. I see a lot of shaking. I have to say I do a lot of public speaking in my work life and in some other pieces of my life, but I do not think I have ever been as nervous as I was being questioned by my pastor and my father at the same time. Right, Monty and Joel? On Sunday mornings, at about 3:30 in the morning, 3:30 a.m., my dad would get up to study his sermon one last time. He typed those sermons on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, folded like a book, and he highlighted the points he wanted to emphasize, which if you heard my dad preach, there were those moments when he had emphasis. He highlighted it with one of those red wax pencils that you sharpen by peeling it. Remember those? Every sermon. And he typed it on a little manual typewriter for years.
Single space.
Single space. I don't know how he read it, really.
He didn't.
He didn't read, that's true, he didn't read his sermons. So I think he'd be disappointed that I'm looking at my notes here. But I remember when Mom, you got him an electric typewriter at one point, and he got so mad and frustrated because he had fat fingers. And he would put his finger down and like triple letters. And you just saw him getting frustrated every time it happened. I think he went back to the manual typewriter at one point because he couldn't take it. Okay, this is trivia that not many people will remember. Dad actually stopped in the middle of a sermon one time. I'm looking at my partner in crime over there. When we were kids, so that the members of the junior choir, which were up in the balcony, could pay attention to the sermon. Now, there's a person in the room that I think was my co-troublemaker when we got stopped that day. Shelby. But he literally did stop the sermon. That stopped us from screwing around up in the back of the hotel. When we were younger, the church wasn't air conditioned. So my dad did a lot of sweating up on the pulpit. And when he got home on Sundays in the summertime, he would take off his t-shirt and he would whip it at one of the kids. Now, I'm not sure if this was a punishment or some kind of strange honor to be on the receiving end of the t-shirt, but it was tradition with us. After Lenten services, Mom would stay for choir, and Dad would take us home. He would, at the same time, in our drive home, speed up pretty fast, I remember, in the little Volkswagen Bug to the top of a hill, the same hill. And then he would pop it into neutral and see how far we could coast. And so during the Lenten season, we would have records. We would try to break these records. So he'd probably get up to 60 miles an hour on these back roads when he got to the... But he was so overjoyed when he broke the record.
Well, I think the record was getting to the Presbyterian church.
It was! And the Methodist church.
Methodist.
And then we sometimes would stop and spy on them through the window and see what they were doing for their Lenten service. Dad was an avid writer of letters and notes to people, and I think my brother-in-law pointed that out. I was so impressed that he took the time to personally write notes to people to thank them, to comfort them in a time of loss or trouble, or to recognize a holiday or birthday. Many have told me that they've kept those notes from Dad over the years because they were so meaningful to them. Who has a dad note tucked away? Look at that. I know that I will always keep the notes he and Mom wrote to me on my birthday this year, because even though he was really getting weak at that point, he made that effort to put his feelings onto paper and share them with me. Again, I could easily keep going with these stories, but I need to give others a chance to share a little. But to sum this up, my dad was a true family man. His families were very important to him, both the Heilman family and extended family and his church family, whether it was here or at other congregations that he served. I must also add that my dad was a better father and pastor because of the love and support my mom gave to him throughout their 67 years of marriage, and right up to the time he took his last breath. They were truly partners in every aspect of their lives, and a testament to the true meaning of what a loving marriage is all about. Now Dad is a member of God's heavenly family, and I know that he's happier there than he's ever been. You know, God blessed us with allowing Mom, Monica, Joel, Amanda, and Katie time to spend with Dad in his last days. We were able to have some conversations with him, although he could barely speak at certain points, that were comforting and in some ways life-changing for us. He talked a lot about forgiveness. And on his last Sunday, my sister actually told him he must have known it was Sunday because he was preaching. My dad was able to describe his glimpses of paradise with amazement as he journeyed towards what he described as a blinding light in the gates of heaven. My mom talked with him about seeing his brothers and sister that had died, and they also talked about seeing my brother Peter, who had gone to heaven many years before. A couple of nights before he died, he was also able to receive communion from a good friend with other friends in our family present. His last moments that he was conscious, he sang with my sister and mother the words of familiar hymns and songs like Jesus Loves Me and Abide With Me, which our quartet did a great job with today. I'm certain that my dad is in heaven with all of the saints that have gone before him. And as much as it's very difficult to miss him here so much on earth, there is such comfort in knowing Dad is in his heavenly home, perfect and at peace. I just want to close my time here with a passage from 1 Peter. And I think this describes my father. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, serving as overseers, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not greedy for money, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. I think my father was a great example. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. Amen. So please have a few other people that are going to come up and just share a few little memories before we break up here. And I've decided Pastor Two, so you can go next.
Oh, gosh. They're following twice
And I'm
today,
timing.
that's not right. Hopefully I'm gonna lighten it up just a little bit here. Now, the very first time I met Pastor Heilman, he came into the office, he sat down, he said, "I cut grass, that's all I do." And he was extremely serious about that moment. And so we had that agreement. He cut grass and that's all he did, except for Amanda's baptism. I think that was the only.
He confirmed some kids too.
And John, when John was made a deacon, he went out for that. And amazingly, he asked me if that was okay. But that was a man of grace too. And that's. But I do want to share with you a couple things. There was a lady of this congregation named Catherine Keller. And Pastor Heilman used to go out and see Catherine all the time. Catherine was a unique soul. Could be at times somewhat difficult. But he would always tell me that she told him that he was her favorite pastor. He was her only pastor. He was her favorite. Well, when I came, I started going out to see Catherine, and she kept asking me how Pastor Heilman was, and I kept saying how he was doing. And finally one day she asked me how he was, and I said, "Oh, I didn't tell you, he passed away." And she got very serious, and I said, "Yeah, he's gone." And then I said, "No, I'm just messing with you, but I'm going to go back and tell him I told you that. And I want you to play along with me on this." And she agreed to do that. So when I came back, he was here. They just finished cutting the grass, and he said, "Well, you know, did Catherine say anything about her favorite pastor?" And I said, "Well, I told her you passed away." He said, "You did not." I said, "Absolutely, I did." And I said, "You're not going out to see her anymore, you know?" And I just told her you passed on. And this went on for months. And he couldn't believe that I had said that to him. And so when he went out there one time before me, I was gone, and he went out there, and I don't know if Dave went with him or somebody, and she knew that he was coming, and she acted very surprised when he showed up at the door. And she was wonderful to play along with all of this. But the other thing is Pastor Heilman loved fast cars, and my daughter had a Mustang, which he loved dearly. And I brought it up here to church one day, I don't remember why, and he said, "Could I go out and look at it?" I said, "Of course you can." So he went out there and he started walking around, and then said, "You want to drive it?" No, I just want to look at it. Well, then he opened the door. He said, "Can I sit in it?" I said, "Sure, you want to drive it?" No, just want to sit in it. And he sat down behind the driver's seat, and I don't know if you told me that his license was already gone. I'm not real sure about that.
Sure he had.
And then he said, "Would it be okay if I took it for a ride?" I said, "Sure." And I handed him the keys, and thinking that he'd leave the parking lot, go around the block, and come back. Well, 40 minutes later, when he wasn't back, and Dave and I are going, "Do you think we ought to call the police?" He was wrapped around a tree someplace. And when he left the parking lot, what worried me just a little bit is he squealed tires going on there. And he went up the road right here, and I'm thinking, "Oh, dear God, you know, my daughter will never forgive me for that car is wrapped around a tree someplace." And when he came back, I have never seen anybody have that kind of grin on their face. My dad had a special name for that grin, and I'm not going to share that with you. But that's the grin he had on his face when he got back out of the car. And from that point on, every year at Christmas time, I would get him a Mustang calendar with all of it. And those are the notes that I have saved in my house, by the way. All the thank you notes from him.
Yep.
So, Dolores, you were a great wife. He knew who the boss was. And he loved you absolutely more than anything. And I just wanted you to know that. So, thanks.
I'm not important enough to get an introduction from Sarah. So.
You have to introduce yourself from now on. I'm done.
Thank you. I don't have notes on my introduction. I'm John Heilman. I'm a nephew of Uncle Mark. His dad and my dad were brothers and very dear friends. They almost looked alike when you saw them next to each other. My fondest memories of Uncle Mark were when I was very young. I was very scared of him because he was so big and he had such a big laugh. And we would come up here every Thanksgiving to spend time with Uncle Mark and Aunt Dolores and the family for Thanksgiving dinner. When any relatives came to our house, my dad was a school teacher. When anybody came to our house for some sort of party or so forth, and they spent the night, the next day my dad would, instead of showing them the sights of Baltimore, he would show them a tour of his church or his school, and that was the big highlight. When we came up to Uncle Mark's, we got to go to King of Prussia.
That's right.
Not only that, but we got to be by ourselves in King of Prussia. Once we be back here at a certain time, that was big time stuff. The other thing we would do would be go to the Brandywine Museum, the battlefield. And the quick story I have about that is it was when I was very, very little and very, very impressionable, and of course Uncle Mark knew this. We were taking the tour, and years ago they had a pit with it was supposed to be a jail, and there was a mannequin in there dressed up like a British soldier. And I always thought that was real. There was a real person down there. So that was the highlight of my trip whenever we go there, is I wanted to see this guy in this pit there. And one day when we were there, I asked Uncle Mark, who is that guy? Well, he was a soldier with the British Army. Well, why is he in jail? Because he's Catholic. I lived the rest of my life believing that was true, to the point where I wrote a report in my grade school years and mentioned it. And at Brandywine Battlefield, there was a statue of a British soldier who was Catholic. And that was his crime. So I have Uncle Mark to thank for that. I have very fond memories of my uncle. He was a great person, and I have tried for many years to be like him, and what they say is imitation is the best form of flattery, and for him it's true. He was a wonderful person. I will miss him almost daily.
Well, I feel totally honored to be asked to do this. And I look at all of you and the people that I'm following, so now I'm nervous. I wasn't nervous until all those other people, but now I'm nervous. So I'm Jody Merrow, and I'm the preschool director here at Christ Memorial. And so I wanted to give you a little perspective on how we knew Pastor Heilman. First of all, though, when I first came here, he personally became very important to me, he and his wife and his daughter. And from day one, he made me feel safe. I don't know how else to say it. I just always knew when he was around, like it was going to be okay. And I knew if there was anything I needed to talk to him about, he would be there. And today, when all I kept feeling is that safe feeling. And when I heard in that song today, For All Thy Saints, it said, their captain in the well-fought fight, I was like, oh, there's the captain. That's why he was the captain of this ship. And I certainly felt that. And he changed our lives just by the way he lived his life. And I think my husband would attest to that. We didn't have a lot of interaction with him, but when we did, you just knew. But you just knew. You just saw God. And it made me stronger, my faith stronger. With the children, I don't know how many of you realize this. So here he is. He's the founding pastor of the church. Heilman Hall. They're going to school in Heilman Hall. And this wonderful man would take their blocks and sand them down. And that's what he did. When he couldn't cut the grass, he would sit down here and sand the blocks for those little ones. And, I mean, if we can't learn from that, like, that's a humble servant of the Lord. And it was just amazing to me. And of course, watching him cut the grass was just fabulous. I mean, watching that tractor go 65 or whatever. I would say, Pastor Heilman's cutting the grass, we better, don't go out to research. The children would watch him like, whoa. And even at the very close to the end, when his legs were just not cooperating with him, he would just take that walker over, and Dave would help him get on that tractor, and he still went 65. And then he'd sit there and wait, and Dave would help him get off, and it was awesome. And didn't he say to you, Dave, well, now I broke this hip. I guess I won't be cutting the grass till next year. But I was very touched by him and who he was, what he taught me, and the whole staff. So on behalf of all of the children and the staff, we were just very, very honored to know him. One of the things you talked about these notes. Well, I have many of these notes, and this one just happened to be one that I found. And Pastor Heilman was so faithful. Like, he was faithful. He asked me about my mom every time he saw me, and I mean every time. Every week, he'd say, how's your mom doing? And I would tell him sometimes good news and sometimes bad news, and he always would tell me something wise about it. When I left him, I would think, well, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. No matter what happens, it's still going to be okay. So every time, the consistency was amazing to me, the faithfulness, every single time. And he wrote a note every time. Like, if I gave him, I don't know, a chocolate lollipop, whatever we put in the box, he would write a note. And I was so touched by that. So I just want to share some of his humor with you as well. I have all these notes because they really are wisdom. And I saved them all. But this one, he said, you certainly find beautiful cards and gifts. The card was most flattering, but I'll take that any time. Of course, I'm writing these few lines with my beautiful new pen. It glides over the paper like a professional skater. So I feel very honored to have been here with him. And he knew I grew up Catholic, and he never told me any of those bad stories. But I did make sure I told him stuff. But I'm very honored that I knew him, very honored to know his beautiful family, and he forever changed my life, and I love him very much. So thank you for letting me tell you.
Mrs. Brighton.
Mrs. Brighton.
Ruth Brighton, and I've worked with Pastor for many years in the area of adult education, particularly in the later years. And so when Sarah Dolores asked me to say a few words, I wrote down a couple notes, and then I just heard from Pastor Norton I only get 3 words. So I'll try to condense it. I will. Just a couple of things, though, that made Pastor Heilman such a wonderful person to work with. First of all, as you know, he always preached about the Word. I mean, we heard it all the time from the pulpit, but he also put it into practice in his life with us here. And we started a push in our synod for getting back to the idea of how important adult education is in the church here for the spiritual growth of all of us, and particularly setting an example for our youth and our young children, which Pastor was, he said that's what we need to do. So he was a big supporter of this idea when we in the early 1980s. And by the way, Heilman Hall has a very good name because being the Christian education, that's really went from cradle to grave was his interest. And he was always a full supporter of everything we did. We had our big push for adult education in the early 80s. He was a huge supporter of it. He worked with a lot of our dedicated lay persons who I see right ahead of us here. And it was wonderful the way he could work with all of us this way, as I think was stated by some of the speakers, how he worked with the lay people just as if he was one of us. And I guess one thing I think about is, I think it was back in 1996, Dolores and I were just talking the other day, I think that was Pastor's 50th year in the ministry and your 50th wedding anniversary, is that right? And you had this special, we had a special time of celebration here at, well, it was in a different place, but the church had it, and they had a guest speaker from the Eastern District, I think it was Pastor Cario. And he got up and they said a few words, and he said he was so impressed with the number of Bible classes we had here, and he said, and you know, he said, the reason for that is because you have a pastor who not only preaches being in the Word from the pulpit, but he is a full participant in the classes every Sunday. And if you think about it, I can never recall a Sunday that pastor didn't attend the Bible class as a participant, just as a regular person, as I say to people. And he preferred not to teach too many classes on Sunday morning. He did once in a while. Preferred to do that during the week. But when he was here on Sunday, he was in Bible class. I remember we used to have our coffee hour down here before we had the great room, and he'd kind of keep his eye on the clock back there. When it was getting close to time, he'd say, okay, folks, and he'd lead the way. He was the first one down the hall. And one of the last memories I had of him of being at church here, which isn't very long ago, and it was time for Bible class, and there he was, walking down the hall, pushing his walker in front of him. And what a marvelous example, living out the life that he preached about among us. And also, I'd just like to say that, Dolores, I don't know if you remember this or not, but when we had our Back to Basics thrust in 1984, we said, well, we're going to have 10 classes and see how many people we have show up. And with all the work that Pastor and the other people did here, it really worked out quite well. And I was